the road she didn't choose. 8-year-old Lily Monroe stood alone on a dirt road outside Red Hollow, Wyoming territory, watching her father's silhouette disappear into the desert dust. He hadn't looked back. Not once. In her small hands, she clutched a rag doll with button eyes, the only thing he'd let her keep. The sun was setting, painting the sky the color of old blood, and she understood with terrible clarity that he wasn't coming back. She had been left behind like broken furniture, discarded because grief had convinced him she was the reason his world had shattered. Now, as darkness crept across the frontier, a child stood abandoned with nothing but a doll and the awful knowledge that her own father had chosen the bottle over her. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, I want to know. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far Lily's story reaches. And if her journey moves you, hit that like button and stay until the end. Because what happens next will change everything. The desert didn't care about abandoned children. Lily learned that truth as the temperature dropped and the wind picked up, carrying dust that stung her eyes and coated her throat. She stood on that empty road for what felt like hours, watching the point where her father had vanished, some stubborn part of her heart insisting he would realize his mistake and come back. He had to come back. Fathers didn't just leave their daughters in the middle of nowhere with night falling and coyotes beginning their evening songs in the hills, but the road remained empty. Her legs began to tremble, not from cold yet, though that would come soon enough, but from the weight of understanding settling into her small body. The doll in her hands had been sewn by her mother's fingers 3 years ago, back when laughter still lived in their house, back before the fever took Mama and left behind 2 people who didn't know how to be a family anymore. Daddy had tried, at first. She remembered that now as she finally forced her feet to move, walking in the opposite direction from where he'd gone. He had tried to braid her hair the way Mama used to, his rough ranch hands fumbling with the ribbon until they both ended up crying. He had burned breakfast and ruined laundry and forgotten to check her schoolwork, but he had tried. Then the trying stopped. The whiskey started speaking louder than his grief, and the words it gave him were cruel. "You look just like her. You sound just like her. If you hadn't been sick that week, she wouldn't have caught the fever. This is your fault. Everything is your fault." Lily walked because standing still meant thinking about those words, and thinking about them made her chest hurt in ways she didn't have language for. The road stretched ahead of her, a pale ribbon in the gathering darkness, leading to places she'd never seen. Red Hollow sat 5 miles behind her now, a town that had watched her father's descent into bitterness and done nothing. Mrs. Henderson at the general store had given her penny candy with pitying eyes. Mr. Calloway at the bank had looked away when Daddy stumbled past at noon, already drunk. The school teacher had stopped asking about bruises. Nobody had stopped this. The sky deepened from orange to purple to black, and stars began appearing like ice chips scattered across velvet. Lily's stomach cramped with hunger. She hadn't eaten since morning, a piece of hard bread she'd saved from yesterday. Her feet, clad in boots too small and worn thin at the soles, began to ache with each step. But she kept walking because the alternative was lying down on this empty road and waiting for whatever came next. And something in her, some spark her mother had kindled that even Daddy's cruelty couldn't fully extinguish, refused to give up that easily. A twisted juniper tree appeared ahead, its branches reaching toward the stars like gnarled fingers. It wasn't shelter, not really, but it was something. A marker. A place to stop while her body still had choice in the matter. Lily sank down against its trunk, the bark rough against her back through her thin cotton dress. The doll settled in her lap, button eyes reflecting starlight. She ran her thumb over the careful stitches of its smile, remembering her mother's voice singing while she sewed, some old song about mockingbirds and diamond rings. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to the doll, trying out the words to see if speaking them might make them true. "Somebody will come. Somebody good." But the desert answered with silence and wind, and eventually exhaustion pulled her into uneasy sleep. Dawn arrived with cold brightness and the sound of wagon wheels. Lily's eyes snapped open, her body jerking upright with the disorientation of waking in a strange place. For one confused moment, she expected to see her bedroom ceiling, to smell coffee brewing, and hear her father's heavy footsteps. Then reality reassembled itself. The tree, the road, the abandonment, and her heart sank back into her chest like a stone. The wagon was still a ways off, but approaching. She could see dust rising behind it, hear the steady clop of hooves and the creak of wood. Her first instinct was to hide, but there was nowhere to go, and running would only delay the inevitable. So she stood, smoothing her dress with trembling hands, and waited. The wagon slowed as it neared, pulled by two sturdy draft horses that looked well cared for. The man holding the reins was somewhere past 40, with sun-weathered skin and gray threading through dark hair. He wore simple rancher's clothes, clean but well-worn, and his eyes were the color of creek water in summer, clear and careful. He pulled the horses to a stop about 10 feet away, making no move to climb down. Just sat there, studying her with an expression that wasn't pity or anger or the glazed indifference she'd grown used to seeing in town. It was something else, something like recognition. "Morning," he said quietly. His voice had gravel in it, but not harshness. "You got a name?" Lily's throat was dry as sand. "Lily Monroe, sir." He nodded once, as if this confirmed something. "I'm Elias Turner. That's my ranch about 6 miles northwest of here." He paused, his gaze taking in her dusty dress, her worn boots, the doll clutched against her chest. "You waiting for someone?" The question was gentle, but it cut deep. Lily felt tears burn behind her eyes and fought them back with everything she had. She had cried enough yesterday. Crying didn't change anything. "No, sir." "No." "You got somewhere to be?" "No, sir." Elias was quiet for a long moment, his hands loose on the reins. One of the horses stamped and blew out a breath. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out, hunting. "I've got coffee still warm in a thermos," he said finally, "and biscuits my wife packed this morning. You look like you could use both." Lily wanted to say yes. Her stomach was eating itself with hunger, and the thought of something warm made her whole body ache with longing. But years of her father's suspicion had taught her caution. "Why would you help me?" The corner of Elias's mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but something close. "Because you need help, and I can give it. That's reason enough, seems to me." He climbed down then, moving slowly so as not to startle her, and retrieved a burlap sack from the wagon bed. When he held it out, Lily stepped forward and took it with both hands, the doll trapped awkwardly between her arm and ribs. Inside were 2 biscuits wrapped in cloth, still faintly warm, and a tin cup. "There's a stream about a quarter-mile back," Elias said, pouring coffee from a dented thermos into the cup. "But this'll do for now?" The coffee was hot and bitter, and the best thing Lily had ever tasted. The biscuits were flaky and buttered, and she had to force herself not to cram them into her mouth all at once. Elias watched her eat without comment, then climbed back onto the wagon bench. "Where are your folks, Lily?" The biscuit turned to dust in her mouth. She swallowed hard, staring at the ground. "My mama died 3 years ago. My daddy—" She couldn't finish, couldn't say the words left me out loud because speaking them would make them permanent. "I see." Elias's voice was neutral, but when she glanced up, his jaw was tight. "You got other family? Aunts, uncles, grandparents?" "No, sir. Just us. Was just us." Another long silence. A dust devil spun itself into existence beside the road, danced for a few seconds, then collapsed. Elias seemed to be working through something, his gaze distant. "My ranch," he said slowly. "It's not fancy, but it's solid. My wife Clara and I, we've got room. We've got work that needs doing, chickens to feed, eggs to gather, garden to tend. Nothing too heavy for someone your size, but useful work, honest work." He looked at her directly then, and his eyes were steady. "You could come with me. Stay until we figure out what comes next. No promises beyond a roof and meals and fair treatment. But no harm either. You have my word on that." Lily's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct her father had beaten into her screamed that trusting strangers led to disaster. But that same father had left her on a desert road to die. So maybe his instincts weren't worth following. And there was something about Elias Turner, something in the way he sat quiet and let her think, didn't push or demand or grab, that felt different from the men she'd known. Different from her father, certainly. Different from the ranch hands who'd leered at her mother in town. Different from the drunk miners who'd propositioned women outside the saloon. "What if you change your mind?" she asked, and hated how small her voice sounded. "Then we'll figure something else out together. But I won't put you back on this road alone. That's not how decent people behave. Decent people. Lily turned the words over in her mind, testing them for truth. Her mother had been decent people. The preacher who'd buried Mama had been decent. Beyond that, she wasn't sure she'd met many others who qualified. But standing here with an empty stomach and nowhere to go, decency in a stranger seemed like better odds than anything else the desert was offering. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll come." Elias nodded once, then gestured to the wagon. "Climb on up. We've got some miles to cover before the heat gets mean." Lily tucked the doll into her dress pocket and pulled herself onto the bench, her legs barely long enough to dangle over the edge. Elias clicked his tongue, and the horses started forward, the wagon creaking into motion. Red Hollow fell away behind them, and with it, the last piece of the life she'd known. The road ahead was just as empty as the one behind, but for the first time since her father's back had disappeared into the dust, Lily felt something other than terror. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was possibility, and that was enough to keep breathing. The Turner Ranch appeared after an hour's drive, shimmering into existence like a mirage that slowly became solid. It sat in a shallow valley where cottonwoods clustered near a creek, their leaves flashing silver in the morning light. The house itself was modest, rough-hewn logs chinked with clay, a stone chimney rising from one end, a covered porch that wrapped two sides. Outbuildings scattered around it, a barn, a chicken coop, a small stable, what looked like a workshop. It wasn't much by any standard Lily knew, but it was cared for. That showed in the neat fences, the well-swept yard, the flowers growing in boxes beneath the windows. Someone here paid attention. Someone here tried. A woman emerged from the house as the wagon approached, wiping her hands on her apron. She was younger than Elias by a decade at least, with auburn hair twisted into a practical bun and freckles scattered across sun-touched skin. Her dress was simple calico, faded from washing but clean, and when she smiled, it reached her eyes. "Elias," she called out, shading her face with one hand. "You're back sooner than I expected." Then she saw Lily, and her expression shifted, not to suspicion or irritation, but to concern. "And you've brought company." Elias pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down, then turned to help Lily, though she managed on her own, stubborn pride making her independent even when her legs shook. She stood beside the wagon, clutching her doll, feeling the weight of the woman's attention. "Clara," Elias said quietly, "this is Lily Monroe. Found her on the Red Hollow Road alone. Her mama's passed, and her father—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "Isn't in the picture anymore." Clara's eyes darkened with understanding, but she didn't press. Instead, she came forward and crouched down so she was at Lily's eye level, her movements slow and deliberate. "Hello, Lily. I'm Clara Turner. Are you hungry? Thirsty?" "Elias gave me biscuits, ma'am, and coffee." "Well, those biscuits were from breakfast, which was hours ago. I imagine you could use lunch." Clara straightened and looked at her husband. "Why don't you tend the horses, and I'll get this girl fed properly?" It wasn't a question, and Elias didn't treat it like one. He nodded and led the team toward the barn, leaving Lily alone with Clara. "Come on inside," Clara said gently. "It's cooler in the house, and I've got stew that's been simmering since morning." The interior of the house smelled like sage and wood smoke and something baking. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting space all in one, with a stone fireplace at one end and a sturdy table at the other. Everything was simple but well made. Hand-woven rugs on the floor, curtains that looked sewn from flour sacks but hung straight and clean, shelves lined with books and dishes. Clara ladled stew into a wooden bowl and set it on the table with a hunk of bread and a glass of water from a pitcher that sweated in the heat. "Sit," she said, and Lily did, too overwhelmed to do anything else. The stew was rabbit and vegetables in a rich broth, and the bread was fresh enough to still be warm inside. Lily ate slowly this time, mindful of manners her mother had taught her, but Clara didn't hover. She moved around the kitchen, kneading dough for tomorrow's bread, giving Lily space to eat without being watched. "That doll have a name?" Clara asked after a while, her hands working the dough with practiced rhythm. Lily looked down at the button-eyed face peeking from her pocket. "Annabelle. My mama made her." "Your mama had good hands. Those stitches are fine work." Something loosened in Lily's chest at hearing her mother praised. She could sew anything: dresses, quilts, curtains. She made everything beautiful. Sounds like she was a special woman. She was. Lily's throat tightened, but she pushed through. She got sick, and then she died, and everything got bad after. Clara's hand stilled on the dough. She was quiet for a moment, then spoke with careful gentleness. Grief does strange things to people. Makes them cruel sometimes when they don't know how else to feel the hurt. Daddy said it was my fault she died. Your daddy was wrong. The words were simple, direct, and absolutely certain. Lily looked up sharply, searching Clara's face for doubt or pity or the careful hedging adults usually did when children told hard truths. But Clara met her gaze straight on, her green eyes clear. Wrong, she repeated. Sickness takes people, Lily. It doesn't ask permission, and it doesn't care about fairness. Your mama's death wasn't your fault, and any man who says different is lying, to you and to himself. Lily felt something crack open inside her, some place where she'd locked away blame and shame and the terrible weight of believing she'd killed her own mother. Tears came then, hot and sudden and unstoppable, and she buried her face in her arms on the table, shoulders shaking. Clara was there in an instant, pulling her into arms that smelled like bread and lavender. She didn't shush or tell her to stop or say everything would be fine. She just held on while Lily cried out 3 years of grief and guilt, her hand stroking slow circles on Lily's back. When the storm finally passed, Lily pulled back, wiping her face with her sleeve. I'm sorry. For what? Crying? That's what tears are for, washing out the hurt so you can see clear again. Clara handed her a handkerchief, plain white cotton with tiny flowers, embroidered in one corner. Keep it. You might need it again. Lily clutched the cloth, still damp from her tears. Why are you being nice to me? Because you're a child who needs help, and I've got help to give. Same as Elias said, I imagine. Clara returned to her bread dough, punching it down with firm satisfaction. We can't have children of our own, tried for years before we accepted it wasn't going to happen. Some people get bitter about that kind of loss. We decided to do something else with the empty space. What? Clara smiled, sad but genuine. Fill it different ways. Foster kids when the town needs placement. Neighbors who need a meal or a hand with harvest. Strangers on roads who shouldn't be alone. She shaped the dough into loaves with practiced efficiency. You're not charity, Lily. You're just someone who walked into our lives at the right time. Or maybe we walked into yours. Either way, you're here now, and that matters. The door opened and Elias came in, brushing dust from his sleeves. He took in Lily's red-rimmed eyes without comment, just poured himself water and drank it standing by the window. I was thinking, he said slowly, that the room off the kitchen might work well for Lily. It's small, but it's got a window and a good bed. Clara's been using it for storage, but we can clear it out easy enough. Already planning to, Clara said. I'll get fresh linens after I get this bread in the oven. Lily looked between them. These two people who'd known her for less than a day and were already rearranging their home to make space. I don't understand. You don't even know me. We know enough, Elias said. You're a child alone. You need a safe place. We have one. The rest we'll figure out as we go. What if my daddy comes back? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Elias and Clara exchanged a look, some wordless conversation passing between them. If he comes back sober and changed and genuinely wanting to be your father again, Elias said carefully, then we'll deal with that when it happens. But Lily, I won't send you back to a man who abandoned you on a desert road. Not unless I'm convinced beyond doubt that you'll be safe. That's not negotiable. Lily absorbed this, testing it for truth. Everything in her limited experience said adults made promises they didn't keep, that trust was a trap, that safety was temporary at best. But these two had already shown her more kindness in one morning than she'd received in months, and there was something in the way they spoke, calm, certain, like their word actually meant something, that made her want to believe. Okay, she said quietly. I'll stay. For now. For now works, Clara agreed. Now finish that stew before it gets cold. Then we'll get you settled and maybe find you a change of clothes. You're about the size of the Sullivan girl who stayed with us last year, and she left some things behind. That afternoon passed in a blur of domestic activity. Clara cleared the small room with brisk efficiency, moving boxes of preserved goods and winter blankets into the barn loft. Elias repaired a loose hinge on the door and installed a hook on the inside so Lily could have privacy. Together they made up the narrow bed with quilts that smelled like cedar from storage, and Clara hung a simple curtain over the window to soften the light. The room was tiny, barely big enough for the bed, a small dresser, and a wooden chair, but it was clean and safe, and hers. Lily stood in the doorway after they finished, staring at the space with something close to wonder. "It's not much," Claire said, "but it's yours for as long as you need it." "It's perfect," Lily whispered, and meant it. That night, she lay in an actual bed for the first time in 2 days, Annabelle tucked under her chin, and listened to the sounds of the ranch settling into darkness. Horses nickering in the barn, wind in the cottonwoods, the low murmur of Elias and Clara talking in the main room, their voices a gentle counterpoint to the night. For the first time since her father's back had disappeared into the desert, Lily felt something unfamiliar settle into her chest. Not quite trust, not yet hope, but the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't been left behind to disappear. Maybe she'd been left behind to be found. The next morning arrived with rooster crow and the smell of frying bacon. Lily woke disoriented, expecting the rough bark of the juniper tree against her back, then remembered with a jolt where she was. The Turner Ranch, the small room, the kindness of strangers. She dressed quickly in the clothes Clara had provided, a simple dress that fit reasonably well and didn't have holes worn through the elbows. Her old dress she folded carefully and placed on the chair, not quite ready to let go of the last thing that connected her to her previous life. In the kitchen, Clara was setting the table while Elias poured coffee from a battered pot. They looked up when she appeared, and Clara smiled. "Morning. You sleep all right?" "Yes, ma'am. Better than I have in a long time." "Good. Come eat, then we'll show you around and figure out what you can help with." Breakfast was bacon, eggs, and biscuits with honey, more food than Lily usually saw in a week. She ate carefully, still not quite believing it wouldn't be snatched away. Elias and Clara talked about the day's work, fence repairs needed in the south pasture, the garden that needed weeding, chickens that had stopped laying as well and might need their nesting boxes cleaned. "I can help with the chickens," Lily offered quietly. "And the garden. I used to help Mama with ours." "That'd be useful," Claire said. "The hens have been temperamental lately. Maybe they just need someone with a gentler touch." After breakfast, Clara showed Lily the daily routine. The chickens lived in a sturdy coop behind the house, a dozen hens and one rooster who ruled them with tyrannical authority. Clara demonstrated gathering eggs, checking for broken shells, looking for signs of illness in the birds. "They're creatures of habit," she explained, reaching under a broody hen with practiced ease. "You treat them calm and steady, they'll trust you. Get rough or scared, they'll raise hell and stop producing." Lily approached the next hen carefully, murmuring softly like her mother used to do with their own chickens. The bird settled under her touch, and she retrieved 3 warm eggs with a flush of pride. "You've done this before," Clara observed. "Back home. Before—" Lily swallowed. "Before Mama died." Clara nodded, asking nothing more. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the sun climbing higher and warming the air. When the egg basket was full, they moved to the garden, rows of vegetables fighting against the desert heat with the help of careful irrigation. "The trick is consistency," Clara said, handing Lily a bucket. "Water deep in early morning and evening. Weed often so they don't steal nutrients. Talk to them if you're inclined. I think it helps, though Elias says I'm foolish." "Mama talked to her plants too," Lily said. "Said growing things needed encouragement same as people." "Your mama sounds like she was wise." They worked through the morning, pulling weeds and checking for pests, and Lily felt something settle in her bones. Not quite belonging, but the early shape of it. Useful work, honest labor, the kind of purposeful activity that made a person valuable to a household. At midday, Elias came back from the south pasture, his shirt dark with sweat. He washed up at the pump while Clara set out lunch, cold chicken and bread with pickles from the cellar. They ate on the porch, taking advantage of the slight breeze. "You settling in all right?" Elias asked Lily between bites. "Yes, sir. Clara's teaching me the routine." "She's a natural with the chickens," Clara added. Already got more eggs this morning than I managed yesterday. Elias smiled at that, a rare expression that softened his weathered face. Good. We can use the help, and honest work's good for the soul. Keeps a person grounded. After lunch, the heat became oppressive enough that outdoor work had to wait. Clara brought out mending, shirts with torn seams, socks with holes, a dress with a hem that needed letting down. She showed Lily how to thread a needle properly, how to make stitches small and even. Your mama taught you to sew? Some. Basic things. She was better at it than me. Sewing's like anything else. Gets easier with practice. Clara worked her needle through fabric with steady rhythm. And it's useful. Can't always buy new when something tears, especially out here. Being able to repair things yourself is worth more than gold sometimes. They sewed in the relative cool of the house, and Lily found the repetitive motion soothing. There was something meditative about it, the way the needle pulled thread through cloth, making small repairs that added up to something whole again. Evening came with the temperature finally dropping. Elias did the heavier chores, feeding and watering the horses, checking the livestock, securing the barn for night. Lily and Clara prepared supper, working side by side in the kitchen with an ease that surprised them both. Dinner was simple but good, beans and cornbread with the last of the pickles. They ate as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple. After dishes were cleaned and put away, Elias brought out a book, a collection of frontier tales, and read aloud by lamplight while Clara knitted and Lily listened. It was the most normal evening Lily had experienced in years. No shouting, no smell of whiskey, no bracing for violence that might or might not come. Just three people sharing space and time, comfortable in the quiet rhythm of daily life. When Clara finally declared it bedtime, Lily went to her small room without protest. She changed into the nightgown Clara had found for her, too big, but soft with washing, and climbed into bed. Through the thin walls, she could hear Elias and Clara talking softly. She's a good child, Clara said. Polite, willing to work, no complaints? She's been through hell, Elias replied. That kind of hurt doesn't heal quick. No, but maybe here she can start. Maybe we can give her that at least. Maybe. Their voices faded into murmurs Lily couldn't make out, and eventually sleep pulled her under into dreams that were less nightmare than they'd been in months. The days developed a pattern after that. Wake with the rooster. Breakfast together. Morning chores, chickens, garden, whatever Clara needed, lunch in the heat of the day, afternoon work in the house, mending, cleaning, learning, evening chores with Elias, dinner, reading or quiet time, bed. It was simple, predictable, and Lily found herself relaxing into it despite every instinct that screamed not to trust this fragile peace. A week passed, then two. The nightmares came less frequently. Her hands grew steady with the chickens. The garden flourished under her attention. Clara taught her to make bread, and though her first loaves came out dense and uneven, she improved with each attempt. Elias showed her how to groom the horses, how to check their hooves for stones, how to read their moods by the set of their ears. The big draft horses were gentle despite their size, and Lily lost her fear of them quickly. Animals know when you're genuine, Elias told her one evening as she brushed down the mare they called Rosie. They don't care about your past or your mistakes. They just respond to how you treat them right now, in this moment. There's a lesson in that, I think. Lily thought about that as she worked the brush through Rosie's mane. Maybe people should be more like animals, judging others by present kindness rather than past failures. But people were complicated in ways animals weren't. 3 weeks after Lily's arrival, Clara took her into town for supplies. Red Hollow looked different from the wagon seat beside Clara than it had when Lily lived there with her father. Smaller, somehow. Less threatening. They stopped at the general store, and Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline when she saw Lily. Well, I'll be. Lily Monroe. Haven't seen you in weeks, child. Heard your daddy left town. He did, Lily said quietly. She's staying with us now, Clara added, her tone pleasant but brooking no argument. We'll need the usual supplies plus fabric for a few dresses. The girl's growing. Mrs. Henderson's expression flickered with curiosity and something that might have been judgment, but she kept her thoughts to herself and filled their order. As they left, Lily caught whispers from two women browsing the thread display. Took in that Monroe girl after her father abandoned her. Turners always were soft-hearted. Lily's cheeks burned, but Clara's hand found her shoulder and squeezed gently. People talk because they've got nothing better to do. You pay it no mind. What matters is the truth between people who actually know each other, not gossip from folks who don't. On the ride home, Lily was quiet, processing the whispers and stares. Finally, she asked, "Do you think he's really gone? My daddy?" Clara was silent for a long moment, guiding the horses with steady hands. "I think he's gone from Red Hollow, at least. Where he went after, I don't know. Do you want him to come back?" Lily considered this carefully. "I don't know. Part of me does, because he's my daddy and he used to be different. But part of me is scared he'll show up and take me away from—" She stopped, not sure how to finish. "From safety?" Clara suggested gently. "From people who don't hurt you?" "Yeah. Then we'll make sure that doesn't happen. Elias and we won't let anyone take you somewhere you're not safe. That's a promise." Lily wanted to believe her. And slowly, day by day, she was learning how. The months that followed wove themselves into a tapestry of small mercies and quiet transformations. Summer deepened into autumn, painting the cottonwoods gold and filling the air with the scent of dying grass and distant smoke from early frost fires. Lily's hands grew calloused from work, her face browned by the sun, and slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, the tight knot of fear in her chest began to loosen. She learned the rhythms of the ranch like a second language, the way the light changed through the seasons, slanting different through her window each morning. The sounds that meant trouble, a horse's distressed whinny, chickens shrieking in genuine alarm rather than their usual fussing, and the sounds that meant everything was well. The smell of rain coming across the desert, sweet and electric, hours before the first drops fell. Clara taught her to bake bread that rose properly, to can vegetables from the garden before the first freeze, to read the signs of illness in livestock before it became serious. Elias showed her how to repair fences, how to read tracks in the dust, how to gentle a skittish horse with patience instead of force. They gave her responsibility bit by bit, trusting her with tasks that mattered, and she rose to meet each one with fierce determination. She belonged to something now, not just to the land or the work, but to the quiet contract between people who chose to care for each other without obligation or blood demanding it. It was a revelation that changed the shape of her understanding about what family could mean. The nightmares about her father didn't stop entirely, but they came less frequently. When they did wake her, heart-pounding, sweat-soaked, convinced she heard his stumbling footsteps in the hall, she would lie still in her small room and listen to the house breathing around her, the creak of old wood settling, the distant hoot of an owl, Clara's occasional cough from the bedroom, sounds that said she was safe, she was wanted, she was home. By the time winter arrived, dusting the valley with snow that never quite stuck but transformed everything into crystal for a few hours each morning, Lily had been with the Turners for nearly 10 months. She was taller now, filling out the dresses Clara had made for her face losing some of its gaunt hollows. In the small mirror above her dresser, a gift from Clara for her 9th birthday in November, she sometimes caught glimpses of her mother in her own features, and it didn't hurt quite as much as it used to. She was helping Clara prepare Christmas dinner when the sound of hoofbeats brought both their heads up. Visitors were rare enough that unexpected ones always carried a thread of tension. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the window, Lily right behind her. A single rider approached, hunched against the cold, his horse moving with the careful gait of an animal that had traveled far. As he drew closer, Lily's breath caught in her throat. She knew that posture, that hat, that horse, her father's old bay gelding, the one thing he'd valued enough not to sell for whiskey money. "Lily," Clara said quietly, her hand finding the girl's shoulder. "Go get Elias. He's in the barn." But Lily couldn't move. She stood frozen, watching as her father dismounted stiffly and tied his horse to the porch rail. He looked different than she remembered, thinner, older, his beard grown out and shot through with more gray. His clothes were shabby but clean, and when he removed his hat and stood at the base of the porch steps, his hands trembled. Clara squeezed Lily's shoulder once, then opened the door and stepped out. Lily followed on legs that felt disconnected from her body. Mr. Monroe, Clara said, her voice level and cool. This is unexpected. Mrs. Turner, her father's voice was rough, like he hadn't used it much lately. I came to see my daughter, if that's all right. That depends on Lily. Both of them looked at her then, and Lily felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing. Her father's eyes, the same blue as her own, were red-rimmed and hollowed out with something that might have been shame or might have been the after effects of too much drinking. She couldn't tell, and the uncertainty made her throat tight. Lily, Clara's voice was gentle. What do you want to do? What did she want? To run and hide seemed like the honest answer, to pretend this moment wasn't happening. But another part of her, the part that still remembered being 4 years old and riding on her father's shoulders, laughing while he sang silly songs, that part wanted answers. Wanted to understand how the man who had once loved her so completely could have left her on a desert road to die. I'll talk to him, she said, surprised by how steady her voice came out. But I want you to stay, Clara. I'm not going anywhere. Elias emerged from the barn then, alerted by the voices or some sixth sense that trouble had arrived. He came to stand beside Clara, his presence solid and reassuring. Her father noticed him and nodded once, a gesture that held acknowledgement and maybe respect. Mr. Turner, thank you for taking care of my girl. She's taken care of herself mostly, Elias said. We just gave her the space to do it. An uncomfortable silence stretched out. Lily's father shifted his weight from foot to foot, his hat clutched in both hands like a shield or a prayer. Finally, he looked directly at Lily, and she saw something in his face she'd never seen there before. Genuine sorrow. Lily, He stopped, swallowed hard. I came to say I'm sorry for everything, for the drinking and the yelling and the blaming, for putting my grief on you when you were grieving too, for being a coward instead of a father. His voice cracked. For leaving you on that road. That was the worst thing I ever done, and I got no excuse for it except I was drunk and broken and not thinking right. But that don't make it okay. Nothing makes it okay. Lily's chest felt too tight to breathe. She wanted to scream at him, to cry, to demand he explain how a father could do such a thing. But the words stuck in her throat, tangled up with emotions she didn't have names for. Why now? Clara asked when the silence stretched too long. Why come back now, months later? Because I got sober. Her father's hands tightened on his hat brim. Took me 6 months, but I did it. Went south to Denver, worked at a stable, stayed away from the bottle, got myself straightened out enough to look at what I'd done without wanting to die from the shame of it. He looked at Lily again. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry and that none of it was your fault. Your mama's death, my drinking, all of it, that was on me, not you. You were just a child who needed her father, and I failed you. You did more than fail her, Elias said, his voice hard. You abandoned her, left her to die alone in the desert. I know, and I'll carry that till my grave. Her father's shoulders sagged. I ain't here to take her back or make demands. I just wanted her to know the truth, that she's blameless, and I'm sorry. Lily found her voice finally, small but clear. Are you still drinking? No, baby girl. Haven't touched whiskey in 4 months. I swear it. Swearing's easy. Keeping sober's hard. Her father flinched like she'd struck him, but he nodded. You're right. You're absolutely right. That's why I ain't asking you to come with me or trust me or anything else. I just needed you to hear me say it. You didn't kill your mama. You didn't deserve what I did. And if I could take it back, I would. Tears burned behind Lily's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had cried enough over this man. Where are you going now? Back to Denver. I got steady work there, a room above the stable. It ain't much, but it's honest. He hesitated, then pulled something from his pocket, a piece of paper folded small. This is the address if you ever want to write, or if you need anything. I don't expect you to, but I wanted you to have it, just in case. He held it out, and after a long moment, Lily stepped forward and took it. The paper was worn soft, like he'd folded and unfolded it many times. She tucked it into her dress pocket without looking at it. Thank you for saying sorry, she said quietly. It don't fix things, but it's something. It's more than I deserve. Her father's eyes were wet now, tears tracking through the dust on his face. "You're a good girl, Lily. Your mama would be proud of the person you're becoming. I can see her in you, the strength, the kindness. Hold on to that." He put his hat back on, then hesitated one more time. Would it be all right if I hugged you goodbye?" Lily looked up at Clara, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Then she looked back at her father, this man who had hurt her so deeply and was now asking permission for something he used to take for granted. "Okay, but just for a second." He came down off the porch slowly, like approaching a wild animal that might bolt, and knelt in the dirt so they were eye to eye. His arms came around her carefully, and he smelled like leather and tobacco, and beneath it something familiar that made her chest ache, some scent memory from before everything fell apart. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "I'm sorry I forgot how to show it. I'm sorry I hurt you. You deserved so much better." Then he let go and stood, backing away before the moment could stretch too long. He untied his horse, climbed into the saddle with visible effort, and looked at the three of them standing on the porch. "Thank you," he said to Elias and Clara, "for giving her what I couldn't, for being the people I should have been." "She earned her place here," Clara said firmly. "This isn't charity. She's family." Something crossed her father's face, pain and gratitude mixed together. He nodded once, then turned his horse and rode away, back down the road that had brought him here. They watched until he disappeared into the distance, a dark speck against the winter-pale landscape. Lily felt Clara's arm come around her shoulders, solid and warm, and she leaned into it. "You all right?" Elias asked. Lily thought about that. Was she all right? Her father had come back, said sorry, asked for nothing, and left again. He had given her something she hadn't known she needed, the explicit knowledge that his failures weren't hers, that she hadn't killed her mother, that the abandonment was his shame to carry, not hers. "I think so," she said slowly. "It's strange. I thought I'd be angrier, or sadder, or something bigger. But mostly I just feel tired." "That's grief for you," Clara said. "Sometimes it's a storm, sometimes it's just this quiet exhaustion. Both are real." They went back inside, and Clara returned to the Christmas preparations while Elias went back to the barn. Lily sat at the table, the piece of paper still in her pocket, and tried to sort through the tangle of emotions in her chest. She had wanted him to come back once, desperately, had imagined him sober and sorry and begging her to return, promising everything would be different. But that fantasy had been about rescue, about him being the father he used to be and making her life whole again. This reality was different. He had apologized, given her the truth she needed, and asked for nothing in return. He had recognized that she had found something better here, something he couldn't give her even at his best, and he had let her go. There was grief in that, but there was also a strange kind of relief. She didn't have to save him or fix him or earn his love. She could just be Lily, growing up with people who already chose her every day. Clara came to sit beside her, flour dusting her hands. "You want to talk about it?" "I don't know what to say." "That's fair. Sometimes feelings are too big for words." Clara was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Are you going to write to him?" Lily pulled out the paper and unfolded it. Her father's handwriting was cramped and uncertain, but legible. An address in Denver, care of Morrison Stables. "Maybe someday. Not now." But maybe. That's wise. You don't owe him anything, Lily. Not forgiveness, not contact, not a relationship. But if you want those things eventually, that's your choice to make. What if he starts drinking again? Then that's his failure, not yours. You can't fix people, honey. They have to fix themselves. All you can do is protect yourself and hope they find their way. Lily folded the paper back up and tucked it into the small wooden box on her dresser, where she kept her mother's handkerchief and the few other precious things she owned. Not thrown away, but not carried everywhere either. Just kept, in case someday she decided to use it. Christmas came 2 days later, quiet and warm despite the cold outside. Clara roasted a chicken and made pie from preserved apples. Elias carved small wooden animals for Lily, a horse, a chicken, a dog, each one detailed and smooth from hours of patient work. Clara gave her a new winter coat, thick wool-dyed deep blue, and a book of fairy tales with illustrations that made Lily's breath catch. "I can't accept these," Lily said, overwhelmed. "They're too much." Nonsense, Clara said firmly. You're part of this family. Family gives gifts on Christmas. That's how it works. Family. The word settled into Lily's heart like a seed finding good soil. Not the family she'd been born into, fractured by death and alcohol and cruelty, but the family she'd found, built on choice and daily kindness and the simple revolutionary act of seeing each other clearly. The winter passed in quiet contentment. Lily grew another inch, learned to knit passable socks, and helped birth her first calf when one of their cows delivered early on a freezing February night. She stood in the barn with Elias, both of them sleepless and worried. And when the calf finally came, wet and wobbling but alive, she felt something fierce and proud bloom in her chest. "You did good," Elias said, his hand warm on her shoulder. "Your mama would be proud." "You think so?" "I know so. You're brave and kind and good at your core. That doesn't come from nowhere. She put that in you, and no amount of hardship can take it out." Spring brought the first wildflowers and news from town that made Lily's stomach clench. Her father had been spotted in Red Hollow, buying supplies at the general store. He was thinner, quieter, and according to Mrs. Henderson, hadn't touched a drop of whiskey. He'd asked about Lily, was she well, was she happy, but made no move to visit the ranch. "What do you want to do?" Clara asked when they heard. "We can make it clear he's not welcome here, if that would make you feel safer." Lily thought about it for a long time. Finally, she said, "I think I want to see him, not to live with him or anything, just to talk, to see if the sober version is different than I remember." "All right, but on our terms. He comes here, in daylight, with us present. You're in control of when it ends. Those are the rules." They sent word through Mrs. Henderson, and 3 days later her father arrived in the late morning, riding the same tired bay gelding. This time Lily was prepared. She met him in the yard with Clara and Elias flanking her like guardians, and he looked smaller than she remembered, less threatening, just a man carrying the weight of his mistakes. "Hello, Lily." "Hi, Daddy." They sat on the porch, her father on the steps, Lily in a chair with Clara nearby, Elias standing by the door, and talked. Not about the abandonment or the drinking, not at first, just small things. How he was working as a farrier now, good with horses, making enough to live on. How Denver was growing, full of people chasing silver dreams. How the winter had been hard, but he'd made it through. Lily told him about the ranch, about learning to bake and sew and care for livestock, about the calf she'd helped deliver and the chickens that now came to her hand without fussing, about Clara teaching her to read better and Elias showing her how to track animals by their prints. Her father listened with an attention he'd never given her before, really heard what she said instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. And slowly, carefully, something began to shift between them. Not forgiveness, not yet. But the possibility of it, the early foundations being laid. "I'm not asking you to come back," he said when the sun was high and the conversation had wound down. "I know you're better off here, but I'd like to visit sometimes if that's all right. Once a month, maybe. Just to talk. Let you see I'm staying sober. Show you I can be the father you deserved, even if it's too late for us to be what we were." Lily looked at Clara, who nodded slightly, then at Elias, who did the same, then back at her father. "Once a month," she said. "For an hour. Here, with Clara and Elias present. And if you show up drunk even once, you don't come back, ever." "That's fair. That's more than fair." Her father's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Thank you, Lily. I won't let you down." "You already did that," she said quietly. "Now you just have to prove you can do better." He left soon after, and Lily watched him go with strange mixture of hope and caution. She didn't trust him, not fully, maybe not ever, but she could give him the chance to earn back some small piece of her respect. The visits became a pattern through the spring and into summer. Once a month, like clockwork, her father would arrive and they would talk. Sometimes for the full hour, sometimes less if the conversation ran dry. He brought her small gifts, a hair ribbon, a book of poetry, a carved wooden bird to match the ones Elias had made. He told her about his work, his efforts to stay sober, the way he was trying to make amends not just to her, but to himself. And slowly, grudgingly, Lily began to see the man he might have been if grief hadn't broken him. The father who used to sing her to sleep, who taught her to skip stones on the creek, who loved her mother with an intensity that made his loss of her that much more devastating. She didn't forgive him, not fully, not in any way that erased what he'd done. But she began to understand that people were more complicated than just their worst moments, that someone could hurt you terribly and still genuinely love you, that healing didn't mean forgetting or excusing, but rather carrying the hurt forward into something that didn't poison everything it touched. Summer deepened toward August, bringing heat that shimmered on the horizon and turned the grass golden. Lily was 9.5 now, taller and stronger and more certain of herself than she'd been a year ago. She had friends in town, other ranch children she saw at church, or when Clara took her to the general store. She had work that mattered and people who depended on her. She had a home. One evening after her father's visit, Clara found her sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky impossible colors. She sat down beside Lily, her knitting in hand but her needles still. "You've been thoughtful lately. Just thinking about how different things are now. How different I am. You've grown. That's what happens when you're safe enough to heal." Lily was quiet for a moment, then asked the question that had been circling in her mind for weeks. "What happens if Daddy gets better? Like really better, sober for years, becomes the person he used to be? Would I have to go back to him?" Clara set down her knitting and turned to face Lily fully. "No, not unless you wanted to. You're not property, Lily. You're a person, and you get a say in where you live and who you live with." She paused, choosing words carefully. "Elias and I, we've been talking. We'd like to make this permanent if you'd want that. Legally adopt you, make you a Turner in name as well as in everything else." Lily's heart stopped, then started again, beating hard enough to hurt. "You want to adopt me?" "We do. We love you, Lily. Not because we feel obligated or because you're useful around the ranch, but because you're you. You're smart and kind and brave, and being your parents, really, legally your parents, would be an honor." "What about my daddy? Wouldn't he have to agree?" "He would. And we haven't asked him yet because we wanted to talk to you first. If you don't want this, we won't pursue it. You can stay here as you are, or you can write to your father when you're older and decide then what relationship you want with him. But if you do want this, if you want to be a Turner, we'll talk to him and make it happen." Lily thought about the question all night, lying in her small room with moonlight spilling across her quilt. Being adopted meant choosing once and for all where she belonged. It meant acknowledging that the family she'd been born into was broken beyond repair, but that she'd found something better in its ruins. It meant letting go of the dream that her father would become who he used to be, and they could go back to the life they'd had before her mother died. That dream was already gone, really. Had died on that desert road when he'd walked away. But making it official felt final in a way that scared her. But it also felt right. True. Like accepting reality instead of fighting it. In the morning, she found Clara and Elias at breakfast and said simply, "I want to be adopted. I want to be Lily Turner." Clara's face lit up with joy, and Elias smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes and made him look years younger. "Then that's what we'll make happen," he said. "We'll talk to your father at his next visit, explain what we're proposing. If he agrees, we'll file the papers." When her father arrived 2 weeks later, they sat him down and laid it out plain. Lily wanted to be adopted. The Turners wanted to adopt her. Would he agree to sign over his parental rights? He was quiet for a long time, his hat turning over and over in his hands. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet but clear. "She's better off with you, I know that. I've always known that." He looked at Lily. "I want you to be happy, baby girl, and if being a Turner makes you happy, then that's what you should be." "You'd really let me go?" Lily asked, needing to hear him say it. "I already let you go when I left you on that road. This just makes it official in a way that protects you." He wiped his eyes roughly. "I'll sign whatever papers need signing, and I'll keep visiting if you'll let me, but as your father who lost his chance, not as someone with legal claim on you." "I'd like you to keep visiting," Lily said quietly. "You're getting better, I can see that. But Clara and Elias, they're my parents now, the ones who chose me and kept choosing me. I understand, and they're good people. Better than I ever managed to be." He stood, crossed to where Elias and Clara sat, and extended his hand. "Thank you for saving her when I failed, for giving her the life she deserves. Elias shook his hand firmly. She saved herself. We just made sure she had the space to do it. The legal process took months, paperwork and court appearances, and a judge who asked Lily directly if this was what she wanted. She said yes without hesitation, and on a cool October day just after her 10th birthday, the adoption was finalized. Lily Monroe became Lily Turner, legally and forever. That night, Clara made a special dinner, and Elias presented her with a gift, a new nameplate for her door, carved with careful letters, Lily Turner. She hung it herself, hammering the small nails with pride, and stood back to admire it. Her name, her room, her family, her choice. When she climbed into bed that night, she pulled out the piece of paper with her father's Denver address, kept all these months in her wooden box, and added it to a letter she'd been writing. Not a long letter, just a few lines thanking him for letting her go, for getting sober, for being brave enough to do what was best for her even when it cost him everything. She signed it Lily Turner and felt the rightness of it in her bones. She was chosen, she was home, and that was enough. The years that followed the adoption settled into Lily like good soil accepting seed. She grew taller through her 11th and 12th years, her body stretching upward while her hands learned the deeper skills of ranching. Not just gathering eggs and weeding gardens, but training horses, mending tack, understanding the economics of livestock and crop rotation. Clara taught her to keep the household accounts, showing her how numbers told the story of survival on the frontier. Elias brought her into the harder decisions about which calves to sell and which to keep for breeding, treating her observations with the same respect he gave Clara's. Her father kept his promise about the monthly visits, arriving on the first Sunday of each month with the reliability of seasons changing. He stayed sober, 3 years now, without touching whiskey, and the visits evolved from stilted conversations into something approaching genuine connection. Not the father-daughter relationship they'd once had, that was gone forever, but something new. He became a friend of sorts, someone who had known her mother and could share memories Lily was starting to forget. Someone who carried his failures openly and made no excuses for them, which somehow made forgiveness easier to extend in small measures. He remarried eventually, a widow named Sarah who ran a boarding house in Denver and had lost her own child to scarlet fever years before. She came with him once, nervous and kind, and made no claim on Lily beyond hoping they might write to each other occasionally. Lily appreciated that restraint, that understanding that she already had a mother in Clara and didn't need another, just perhaps another adult who cared whether she was well. The ranch prospered in those years. Elias expanded their herd and Clara's garden became something of local legend, producing vegetables even in the harshest summers through careful irrigation and stubborn determination. They hired seasonal help during harvest and roundup, men who treated Lily with the casual respect given to a rancher's daughter, which still surprised her sometimes. She had gone from abandoned child to valued member of a working household, and the transformation still felt almost magical in its completeness. When Lily turned 13, Clara sat her down for a conversation that made her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but which she understood was necessary. They talked about the changes happening to her body, about what it meant to become a woman, about the care she would need to take, and the decisions that would become hers to make. Clara was frank and factual, treating the subject with the same practical approach she gave to canning vegetables or dosing sick cattle, which somehow made it less mortifying. "You're growing up," Clara said, her hands steady as she hemmed a new dress for Lily, this one in deep green calico. "That means more responsibility, but also more freedom. Your father and I, we trust you. We've watched you become someone thoughtful and capable, and we're proud of who you're becoming." "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real," Lily admitted. "That I get to stay here, that you wanted me enough to make it legal, that I have parents who actually like me." Clara's hands stilled on the fabric. "Lily Turner, we don't just like you. We love you fierce and deep, the way parents are supposed to love their children. You're not here on sufferance or out of obligation. You're here because you're ours and we're yours, and that's not going to change." Those words settled into the places that still sometimes ached with old wounds, soothing them like salve on rope burn. Lily was learning that healing wasn't linear, that she could go months feeling completely secure and then have a nightmare about being left on that desert road, waking up gasping and needing to see the nameplate on her door to remember she was safe. But those moments came less frequently now, and when they did, she had people who understood and didn't make her feel broken for still carrying scars. The town of Red Hollow had grown in the years since Lily first arrived with Elias, new families settling as the railroad pushed westward and brought commerce with it. The school expanded from 1 room to 2, and Lily attended regularly now, walking the 3 miles each way with the Morrison children from the neighboring ranch. She was good at her studies, particularly arithmetic and composition, and the teacher, Miss Patterson, encouraged her to think about eventually becoming a teacher herself. "You have patience and clarity," Miss Patterson told her one afternoon after class. "Those are gifts not everyone has. You could do real good helping other children learn." The idea took root slowly, the way important things often did. Lily had never imagined a future beyond the ranch, beyond the daily work and seasonal rhythms. But the possibility of teaching, of helping children who might be struggling the way she once had, appealed to something deep in her character. She mentioned it to Clara and Elias that evening over supper. "Teaching's honorable work," Elias said, cutting into his steak with deliberate precision. "Requires education, though, more than what's offered here in Red Hollow." "There's a normal school in Denver," Clara added. 2 years of training after you finish regular schooling. It's not cheap, but we've been setting aside money. If that's what you want, we can make it happen." Lily felt her throat tighten with emotion. 4 years ago, she'd been a child with nothing, and now her parents were talking about sending her to school in the city, investing in a future she was only beginning to imagine. "I'd have to leave the ranch." "For a time," Clara agreed. "But you'd come back summers, and afterward you could teach anywhere you wanted, even here in Red Hollow if a position opened up. The point is giving you choices, Lily, making sure you have options beyond what we can offer here." That night, Lily lay awake thinking about the future, about possibilities stretching out in directions she'd never considered. She was 14 now, which meant 3 more years of schooling in Red Hollow before she'd be eligible for the normal school. 3 years to decide if teaching was truly what she wanted or if something else called to her more strongly. The freedom to choose felt almost overwhelming, a gift she was still learning to accept. Her father's visits continued through these years of growth and change, and she watched him continue to transform as well. He opened his own farrier shop in Denver, building a reputation for honest work and fair prices. The haunted look that had shadowed his eyes for so long gradually faded, replaced by something approaching peace. He and Sarah seemed genuinely happy together, their partnership built on shared loss and mutual understanding rather than the passionate intensity he'd had with Lily's mother. It was quieter, steadier, and seemed to suit him better in his changed state. During one visit when Lily was 15, he brought news that made her pause in the middle of shelling peas on the porch. "Sarah's expecting," he said quietly. "Baby's due in December." Lily's hands stilled. Her father having another child felt strange, like watching him start over with a family that didn't include the wreckage of his first attempt. But when she looked at his face, she saw not excitement trying to replace old grief, but cautious hope tempered by awareness of how badly he'd failed before. "Congratulations," she said, meaning it. "Are you scared?" "Terrified," he admitted. "I ruined it the first time with you. What if I mess this up too?" "You're different now, sober, stable, married to someone who can help you through the hard parts. And you're not carrying fresh grief this time." She met his eyes directly. "But if you ever treat that baby the way you treated me, I'll never forgive you. You understand that?" He nodded slowly, accepting the weight of her words. "I understand, and you're right to say it. I got one chance to make things right as a father, and it's not with you. That ship sailed when I left you on that road. But maybe I can be better this time. Learn from my failures." "I hope you can," Lily said simply. Every child deserves a father who shows up sober and kind. The baby, a boy they named James, arrived in a cold December, and Lily met him the following spring when she visited Denver for the first time. The city overwhelmed her with its noise and crowds and buildings that seemed to scrape the sky, but Sarah's boarding house was warm and welcoming. She held her half-brother carefully, this tiny creature who shared her blood but would grow up in completely different circumstances, and felt a fierce protective instinct rise in her chest. "You be good to him," she told her father quietly, while Sarah bustled in the kitchen. "Don't make me regret hoping you could change." "I won't," he promised. I swear it on everything I got left." Back at the ranch, life continued its steady progression. Lily turned 16 and finished her schooling in Red Hollow, graduating top of her small class. Miss Patterson wrote her a letter of recommendation for the normal school that made Lily's eyes sting with gratitude, calling her a young woman of exceptional character and intellectual promise. The letter joined others in a growing file. One from the minister praising her volunteer work teaching Sunday school to younger children. One from Mrs. Henderson at the general store attesting to her honesty and work ethic. The night before she was set to leave for Denver and the normal school, Clara found her packing her trunk by lamplight, folding and refolding the same dress with nervous energy. "You're going to wear that fabric thin if you keep handling it," Clara said gently, sitting on the edge of Lily's bed. "I'm scared," Lily admitted. "What if I'm not smart enough? What if the other students are better prepared? What if I fail and waste all the money you and Elias saved?" "Then you come home and we figure out what's next together. But Lily, you're not going to fail. You're one of the most determined people I know, and determination counts for more than natural brilliance." Clara smoothed the quilt with one work-roughened hand. "You survived being abandoned at 8 years old. You learned to trust again when you had every reason not to. You chose forgiveness over bitterness. A teaching school isn't going to break you. What if I get there and realize I don't want to come back, that I want something bigger than Red Hollow and the ranch?" "Then that's what you do," Clara said firmly. "We didn't raise you to be chained to this place, Lily. We raised you to be free, to choose your own path. If that path leads away from here, we'll miss you something fierce, but we'll be proud of you for taking it." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "You and Elias, you saved me. How do I ever repay that?" "You don't. That's not how love works. You just live well and be kind and pass it forward when you can. That's all we want." Clara pulled her into a hug that smelled like bread and lavender. "Now stop fretting and get some sleep. Morning comes early, and you've got a train to catch." The journey to Denver the next day felt both endless and too short. Elias drove her in the wagon to the train station in Red Hollow, her trunk strapped in the back along with a basket of food Clara had packed. Enough for 3 days, even though the journey was only hours. At the station, Elias handed her an envelope thick with bills. "Emergency money," he said gruffly. "Don't spend it unless you need to, but it's there if things get tight. And write to us. Your mother will worry herself sick if she doesn't hear from you regular." "I will, I promise." Lily hugged him hard, this man who had stopped his wagon for a desperate child and changed the entire trajectory of her life. "Thank you, Papa, for everything." It was the first time she'd called him that, and she felt him still in her arms. When he pulled back, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "You go be brilliant," he said. "Make us proud." "I'll try." The train rattled and swayed through landscape that shifted from desert scrub to mountain foothills, and Lily watched it all with wide eyes, Annabelle the rag doll tucked into her carpet bag. She'd thought about leaving the doll behind, worried the other students would think her childish for keeping it. But in the end, she'd packed it anyway. Annabelle was the last thing her mother's hands had made, and letting go of that felt like losing more than Lily was willing to sacrifice. Denver had grown since her last visit, sprawling and loud and full of people rushing toward futures they were convinced waited just around the next corner. The normal school sat on the edge of the city, a solid brick building surrounded by newer homes and hopeful gardens. Lily found her assigned dormitory room, small and spare, with 2 narrow beds and 2 desks, and met her roommate, a girl named Margaret from a farming family near Colorado Springs. Margaret was talkative where Lily was cautious, optimistic to the point of naivety, and initially overwhelming. But she was also genuinely kind, with no malice in her chatter, and over the first weeks they developed an unlikely friendship. Margaret had never known real hardship, her life a smooth progression of family support and assumed success. Lily's history was darker, more complicated, though she shared only the basics. Mother dead, father unable to care for her, adopted by ranchers who gave her a second chance. The coursework was rigorous, more demanding than anything Lily had encountered in Red Hollow's small school. Educational theory, child psychology, practice teaching sessions where older students critiqued every word and gesture. She studied late into the night by lamplight, determined to prove she belonged here, that Miss Patterson's faith in her wasn't misplaced. Some subjects came easily. She had a natural gift for explaining complex ideas in simple terms. Others required grinding effort, memorization, and repetition until the knowledge stuck. She wrote to Clara and Elias weekly, long letters describing her classes and the other students and the way the city never seemed to fully sleep. Their responses came faithfully, Clara's handwriting neat and encouraging, Elias's more cramped but no less supportive. They told her about the ranch, about the new foals and the garden's yields, about Mrs. Henderson asking after her, and the minister hoping she'd return to teach Sunday school in summers. Her father wrote too, less frequently, but with genuine interest in her progress. He included sketches James had scribbled, illegible baby art that nonetheless made Lily smile, and reports that he was staying sober, the shop was doing well, Sarah sent her regards. The letters were evidence of the life he was building, proof that people could change if they wanted it badly enough and had support to maintain it. The first year passed in a blur of study and growth. Lily returned to the ranch that summer, sun-browned and confident, full of educational theories and teaching strategies. She helped with the ranch work during the day and spent evenings reading everything she could find, hungry for knowledge after a year of structured learning. Clara and Elias watched her with quiet pride, asking questions about her studies and listening to her answers like they mattered. "You're different," Clara observed one evening as they snapped green beans together on the porch. "More sure of yourself. It's good to see." "I've found something I'm good at," Lily said. "Teaching makes sense to me in a way nothing else has. Helping children understand things, watching them figure it out, it feels right. Your mama would be so proud. She always said you were smart as a whip, even when you were tiny." Lily smiled at that, treasuring any scrap of memory about her mother. The woman who had sewn Annabelle and sung about mockingbirds felt increasingly distant, her features blurring in Lily's mind despite the small daguerreotype Clara had framed for her. But the knowledge that she would have been proud felt like a blessing across years and death. The second year of normal school was harder, the expectations higher. Student teaching placements began, and Lily found herself standing in front of actual children, responsible for their learning. The first day she was so nervous she forgot half of what she'd planned to say, but the children, 8 and 9 years old, poor families mostly, hungry for education they knew was their only path upward, responded to her genuine care with attention and effort. She learned to manage a classroom through trial and error, discovering that fairness mattered more than strictness. The children learned better when they felt safe, that poverty and hardship could be overcome with patience and high expectations. She thought often of her own childhood, of being the child who needed grace and second chances, and tried to give her students what she'd once received. Her supervising teacher, an older woman named Mrs. Caldwell, who had taught for 30 years, pulled her aside after observing one of her lessons. "You have a gift," she said bluntly. "Not just competence, but actual talent. You see the children, not just as students, but as people. That's rare, and it matters more than all the theory in the world." The validation meant everything. Lily walked back to her dormitory that evening, feeling 10 feet tall, certain for the first time that she had found her calling. This was what she was meant to do, teach children, especially those who struggled, who came from hard places and needed someone to believe they could rise above their circumstances. She graduated from the normal school in the spring of 1889, receiving her teaching certificate with honors. Clara and Elias made the journey to Denver for the ceremony, Elias uncomfortable in his Sunday suit, Clara radiant with pride. They sat in the audience with her father and Sarah and little James, who was 3 now, and remarkably well-behaved through the long speeches. Afterward, they all had dinner at a restaurant fancy enough to make Lily nervous about using the wrong fork, and toasted her success with cider. "To Lily Turner," her father said, raising his glass, "who survived everything life threw at her and came out stronger, who chose compassion over bitterness, who's going to change lives the way hers was changed." "To Lily," the others echoed, and she felt the weight of their belief in her like a physical thing. The question of where she would teach had been looming for months. Positions were available across Colorado and Wyoming territories, mining towns desperate for educated teachers, growing cities that could pay better salaries, even an offer from a private academy in Denver that would have been prestigious and well compensated. But when the school board in Red Hollow wrote offering her the position at her old school, Miss Patterson having finally retired, Lily knew what her answer would be. "I'm going home. she told Clara and Elias over breakfast at Sarah's boarding house. Taking the Red Hollow position. It doesn't pay as much as the others, but it's where I'm supposed to be. You're sure? Elias asked. Not just choosing it because of us? I'm choosing it because those are my people. Children like I was, ranch kids who have to walk miles to school, who work before and after classes, who need someone to believe in them. I can do more good there than in some fancy city school. Clara reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Then we'll help you however we can. You can live at the ranch, save your salary, build a life. And that was what Lily did. She returned to Red Hollow that summer as the new school teacher, boarding at the ranch and riding the same 3 miles to school each morning that she'd once walked. The children who filed into her classroom that first day were the younger siblings and cousins of people she'd grown up with, children who knew her story, how she'd been abandoned and taken in, how she'd made good. Some looked at her with admiration, others with skepticism that someone so young could really teach them anything. But Lily had learned patience and strategy from 2 years of intensive training and practice. She established clear rules and high expectations, but also made her classroom a place of safety and encouragement. She saw which children came to school hungry and made sure there were extra supplies in her desk, biscuits, apples, dried meat, that could be distributed discreetly. She noticed which students struggled with reading and stayed late to help them, never making them feel stupid or slow. Within months, parents were commenting on the difference. Children who had hated school suddenly eager to attend, students who had been written off as hopeless starting to improve. The school board congratulated themselves on hiring her, though Lily knew the real work was just beginning. She taught through autumn and winter of that first year, learning and adapting, making mistakes and correcting them. She broke up fights and mediated disputes, taught children to read and cipher, explained the world beyond Red Hollow through maps and books and stories. She was 20 years old and responsible for 40 children's education, and some days the weight of it felt crushing. But then a child who had struggled all term would suddenly understand fractions, their face lighting up with comprehension, and Lily would remember why she'd chosen this work. Or a parent would pull her aside after church to say their daughter was reading for pleasure now, something they'd never expected, and gratitude would make their voice thick. Those moments sustained her through the difficult days. Her father visited less frequently now. The journey from Denver was long, and he had James to care for, but they wrote regularly, their relationship settled into something comfortable and distant. He was proud of her, he said in his letters. She had become someone remarkable despite his failures, and he hoped James would grow up to be half as strong and compassionate as his big sister. Lily appreciated the sentiment, even as she recognized the reality. She and her father would never have the closeness some daughters had with their fathers. Too much had been broken, too many years lost. But they had something, a relationship built on hard truth and earned respect, and that was enough. The second year of teaching brought new challenges and deeper satisfaction. Lily started a small library in her classroom, soliciting book donations from families who had them to spare. She organized a winter program where students recited poetry and sang songs, giving shy children a chance to shine and proud parents reason to beam. She advocated for better school supplies from the board, arguing that children couldn't be expected to learn without basic materials. She was becoming not just a teacher but a fixture of the community, someone people turned to for advice about their children's education and futures. It was responsibility she took seriously, remembering always that she had once been the child who needed advocates, who required someone to see potential beneath hardship. On a spring evening just after her 21st birthday, Lily sat on the ranch porch with Clara, watching the sunset paint the valley gold. They had fallen into comfortable silence, the kind that came from years of understanding each other, when Clara spoke. "You've built something here, Lily, something good and lasting." "I learned from the best," Lily said quietly. "You and Elias, you showed me what it means to choose people, to invest in them without expecting return. That's what I try to do with my students. And you do it well. We're so proud of who you've become." Lily turned to look at Clara, this woman who had taken in a desperate child and given her everything, safety, love, education, the freedom to become whoever she was meant to be. "I never thanked you properly, for stopping Elias's wagon that morning, for making space for me, for choosing me again and again, even when I was difficult or scared or broken." You were never broken, Clara said firmly. Hurt, yes. Scared, absolutely. But never broken. You were always Lily, brave and strong and good at your core. We just gave you room to remember that. As the stars began appearing overhead, scattered like promises across the darkening sky, Lily thought about the girl she'd been, small and abandoned, clutching a rag doll on a desert road, convinced she'd been erased from the world. And she thought about who she'd become, a teacher, a daughter, a woman who had turned abandonment into purpose and pain into compassion. The road that had seemed to lead nowhere had actually led here, to this porch, this family, this life, built on the revolutionary foundation of being chosen. And that, Lily understood now, was the truth that would shape everything still to come. Being abandoned once didn't define her. Being chosen did. 3 more years passed in the rhythm of teaching and seasons turning, and Lily grew into her role with the confidence that comes from competence proven through daily practice. Her classroom became known throughout the territory as a place where struggling children found their footing and bright ones were challenged to reach further. Parents who had themselves barely learned to read brought their children to her with hope in their eyes, trusting her to give their sons and daughters opportunities they'd never had. She was 24 now, considered a confirmed spinster by some of the town gossips, who couldn't understand why a presentable young woman with steady employment would turn down the handful of marriage proposals she'd received. There had been 3 over the years: a rancher's son, a bank clerk from the next town over, and most recently the new deputy sheriff who'd arrived from Kansas with romantic notions about the frontier. Lily had declined each one politely but firmly, unwilling to trade the independence she'd fought so hard to claim for the conventional security of marriage. "Don't you want a family of your own?" Margaret had asked during one of her visits from Colorado Springs, where she'd married a shopkeeper and already had 2 babies. They sat in Lily's small teacher's quarters behind the schoolhouse, drinking tea while Margaret's children napped. "I have a family," Lily said simply. "Clara and Elias, my students, the community here, that's enough for me. But children of your own, a husband to care for you, I don't need caring for. I care for myself just fine." Lily softened her tone, seeing Margaret's hurt expression. "I'm happy for you, truly. Your life is beautiful and suits you perfectly. But it's not the only way to live, and it's not what I want." What Lily wanted, though she didn't say it aloud, was the freedom to continue choosing her own path without having to negotiate every decision with a husband who might not value her work or understand her calling. She'd seen too many bright women diminish themselves in marriage, their dreams shelved in favor of their husband's ambitions. Maybe there were men who would be true partners, who would encourage rather than constrain, but Lily hadn't met one yet and wasn't willing to settle for less. The autumn of her 5th year teaching brought unexpected change in the form of a letter from the territorial superintendent of schools. Lily opened it at the supper table while Clara dished out stew, and Elias read the weekly newspaper from Denver. "They want me to train other teachers," she said, scanning the formal language with growing surprise. "The superintendent saw my methods during his visit last spring and thinks they should be implemented across the territory. He's asking me to develop a 6-week summer training program for new teachers with a stipend that would pay more than my annual teaching salary." Clara set down her ladle with a thump. "That's wonderful, Lily, a real recognition of what you've accomplished." "It would mean leaving Red Hollow for the summer," Lily said slowly, working through the implications. "Going to Denver or wherever they want to hold the training. Being away from the ranch, from you and Elias." "You're 24 years old," Elias said from behind his newspaper. "You don't need our permission to take an opportunity like this." "I know that, but I value your opinion." He folded the paper and looked at her directly. "Then here it is. You'd be a fool not to do it. You've mastered teaching children. This is a chance to multiply your impact by teaching teachers. Everything you know, all the methods you've developed for reaching struggling students, could spread across the whole territory instead of just helping the 40 children in your classroom each year." The logic was sound, but Lily felt the familiar tug of competing loyalties. Her students needed her, particularly the ones who struggled. The community had come to depend on her presence, and leaving felt uncomfortably close to abandonment, even though she'd be coming back. "What if they don't want me to return to Red Hollow after?" What if this leads to something bigger that takes me away permanently? Clara came to sit beside her, her capable hands folded on the table. Then you go where you're called to go. Lily, we raised you to be free, remember? That means free to leave when opportunity knocks, not just free to stay because it's comfortable. We'll miss you terribly if you go, but we'll be proud of you for taking the chance. Lily looked at these two people who had given her everything and asked for nothing in return, who even now were encouraging her to risk the life they'd built together for the possibility of something larger. Her throat tightened with emotion. I don't want to lose this, she said quietly. This home, this certainty that I belong somewhere. You can't lose what you are, Elias said. You're a Turner, legally and in every way that matters. That doesn't change whether you're teaching in Red Hollow or training teachers in Denver or doing anything else the world asks of you. You're ours and we're yours, and distance doesn't alter that. So Lily wrote back accepting the position and spent the spring developing curriculum for the training program while finishing out her school year. She organized her methods into written lessons, documented the strategies that had proven most effective, created sample lesson plans that new teachers could adapt to their own classrooms. It was harder than she'd expected, translating instinct and experience into teachable content, but she worked at it with the same determination she'd brought to everything else. The last day of school before summer break was bittersweet. Her students presented her with a handmade card signed by all 40 of them, the younger ones' signatures wobbly and oversized, the older ones attempting elegant script. Several mothers pulled her aside to thank her, their eyes bright with tears, saying their children had flourished under her guidance in ways they'd never imagined possible. You changed my boy's life, Mrs. Peterson said, gripping Lily's hands. He was so far behind, and I thought he'd end up working the mines with no education at all. But you saw something in him, worked with him after school all those months, and now he's reading at grade level. That's a gift you gave us, Miss Turner. A real gift. Lily hugged her, moved by the gratitude but also humbled by it. Your son worked hard. I just helped him see what he was capable of. When the last student had been collected and the schoolhouse stood empty, Lily locked the door and walked home to the ranch, letting herself feel the full weight of what she was about to do. Leaving, even temporarily, even for good reason, required courage she wasn't sure she possessed. But courage, she'd learned, wasn't the absence of fear. It was doing what needed doing despite the fear, trusting that the foundation beneath you was solid enough to support the risk. The journey to Denver in early June felt different from her nervous trip to normal school years before. She was a professional now, carrying curriculum she'd developed and confidence earned through 5 years of successful teaching. The city had continued to grow, sprawling further into the foothills, and the building where the training program would be held was new, a proper teacher's college with modern classrooms and a library that made Lily's heart race with longing. The 23 teachers enrolled in the program ranged from fresh-faced 18-year-olds just out of normal school to experienced educators in their 40s seeking new methods. Most were women, though there were 3 men, including one older gentleman who'd been teaching in remote mining camps for 2 decades. They looked at Lily with varying degrees of skepticism when she was introduced as their instructor. She was younger than half of them, after all, but she'd anticipated this and opened with a story. My first day teaching, she told them, standing at the front of the room with her hands steady despite her racing heart. I forgot everything I'd planned to say. Just stood there in front of 40 children, frozen with terror, convinced I'd made a terrible mistake. And then one of the students, a little girl named Emma, raised her hand and asked if I was scared too, because she was scared on her first day of school, and her teacher had told her that being scared just meant you cared about doing well. The teachers laughed, and some of the tension in the room eased. That little girl taught me something I'm going to teach you over these 6 weeks, that our students are people, not empty vessels we pour knowledge into. They have insights and fears and wisdom we can learn from if we're willing to listen. Everything I'm going to show you comes from that basic principle. See the child, not just the curriculum. Teach the person, not just the subject. Over the following weeks, Lily worked with the teachers like she worked with her students, patiently, individually, adapting her methods to their needs and learning styles. She demonstrated how to identify children who struggled with reading versus those with comprehension issues versus those who simply needed glasses they couldn't afford. She showed them how to create a classroom environment where asking questions was rewarded rather than punished, where mistakes were treated as learning opportunities rather than failures. She taught them practical strategies for managing classrooms with wildly different skill levels, for keeping older students engaged while helping younger ones catch up, for working with parents who were illiterate themselves but desperate for their children to have better. She shared her methods for teaching children who were hungry or tired or traumatized, recognizing that learning happened best when basic needs were met first. The teachers absorbed it all with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Some, particularly the younger ones, took notes frantically and asked endless questions, eager to implement everything immediately. Others pushed back, arguing that their situations were different, their students harder, their resources more limited. Lily listened to their objections with patience and then shared her own story, the part she usually kept private. "I was 8 years old when my father abandoned me on a desert road," she told them during the third week, when resistance to her methods had peaked. 8, alone, convinced I was going to die. A rancher named Elias Turner stopped his wagon and offered me food and safety without asking for anything in return. His wife Clara took me in, taught me that I had value beyond what I could produce or how useful I was. The room had gone completely silent. They adopted me when I was 10, gave me their name and their home and every opportunity they could afford. They sent me to normal school, supported my decision to teach, and encouraged me to take this position even though it meant leaving them for the summer. Everything I am, everything I know about education and compassion and seeing potential in struggling children, it comes from being that struggling child who someone chose to invest in. She met their eyes one by one, letting them see the truth beneath her professional competence. Every child who walks into your classroom is someone's whole world. They might be hungry or scared or convinced they're stupid because that's what they've been told their whole lives. Your job isn't just to teach them reading and arithmetic. It's to show them they're worth teaching, that they have value beyond their circumstances, that someone believes in their ability to learn and grow. After that, the resistance largely disappeared. The teachers began sharing their own stories, of students they'd failed, of children they'd given up on too soon, of regrets that haunted them. Together, they worked through how to do better, how to reach further, how to build classrooms that were safe enough for learning to happen. Lily visited her father and Sarah several times during those weeks, meeting them for Sunday dinners where James, now 7 years old, chattered endlessly about school and friends and the horse he was learning to ride. Her father was grayer, slower, but still sober and still married, his little family intact in ways his first one had never been. Lily felt no jealousy about this, only quiet satisfaction that he'd managed to not repeat his worst mistakes. "You're doing important work," he told her one evening while Sarah put James to bed and they sat on the boarding house porch watching the city lights flicker on. "Training teachers, multiplying your impact. Your mama would be so proud. You've said that before." "Because it's true. And because I want you to know that even though I failed you terribly, I can still see what you've become, still marvel at it." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "You turned abandonment into a calling. That takes strength I never had." "You have it now," Lily said. "Staying sober for 8 years, being a good father to James, building a stable life. That's strength too." "Maybe, but it came too late for us." "It came when it came. We have what we have, and it's enough." She meant it. Their relationship would never be what it might have been if he'd made different choices, but it was real and honest and built on acceptance of hard truths. That mattered. The training program concluded in late July with a formal presentation where each teacher demonstrated a lesson incorporating the methods they'd learned. Lily watched with pride as they taught mock students, fellow teachers playing the roles of children at various skill levels, with patience and creativity and genuine care. Not all of them would be great teachers, she knew that, but all of them were better than they'd been 6 weeks ago, and that was victory enough. The superintendent attended the final day and pulled Lily aside afterward. "The territorial government wants to make this an annual program," he said, "and we'd like you to develop an advanced training for experienced teachers as well. There's funding for a permanent position if you're interested, based in Denver, year-round work, with opportunities to travel and observe schools across the territory." It was everything Lily might have wanted 3 months ago. Steady employment with better pay than teaching provided, Important work that would impact education across the entire territory, the excitement of city life and professional advancement. But standing in that Denver classroom with opportunity laid before her, Lily found herself thinking about Red Hollow. About her 40 students who would return in September expecting her to be there. About Clara and Elias on the ranch, aging now and needing her presence more than her distance. About the small classroom where she'd learned to transform children's lives one relationship at a time. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course, take the rest of the summer. But Lily, this is a rare opportunity. Positions like this don't come along often, especially for women." "I understand, and I'm grateful. I just need to make sure I'm choosing for the right reasons." She returned to Red Hollow in early August, the high desert heat pressing down like a hand. Clara and Elias met her at the station, their faces lighting up when they saw her, and Lily felt something settle in her chest that had been unsettled since leaving. That evening at supper, she told them about the job offer. They listened without interruption, and when she finished, Elias set down his fork with deliberate care. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to take it. It's important work, good pay, real influence. But part of me wants to stay here, keep teaching my students, be close to you." "Don't stay because of us," Clara said firmly. "We're fine, Lily. We'll be sad if you go, but we'll manage. Make this decision based on what you want, not what you think we need." "What if I don't know what I want?" "Then figure it out," Elias said. "You've got time. But I'll tell you what I see. You light up when you talk about your students here. Individual children you know by name, whose lives you're shaping day by day. When you talked about the training program just now, you sounded proud of the work, but not passionate about it. That tells me something." Lily thought about that over the following weeks as she prepared for the new school year. She visited each of her students' families, checking in on how their summers had gone and what challenges they anticipated for the coming year. She organized her classroom, planned her curriculum, ordered supplies with the small budget the school board provided, and she paid attention to how she felt doing it, not obligated or resigned, but genuinely excited. She loved teaching. Not the abstract idea of improving education across a territory, but the daily reality of working with actual children whose names she knew, whose struggles and triumphs mattered to her personally. She loved seeing the moment comprehension dawned in a child's eyes, loved mediating playground disputes, and reading aloud during afternoon story time and staying late to help a student who needed extra support. The territorial position would be important work, but it wouldn't be her work, not the work that made her heart sing. So when September arrived and school began, Lily wrote to the superintendent declining the position with gratitude and regret. She recommended 2 of the teachers from her summer program who she thought would excel in the role, then set the letter aside and turned her attention to the 40 children filing into her classroom, each one carrying their own hopes and fears and potential. "Welcome back," she told them, and meant it with her whole heart. The years continued their steady progression after that decision, and Lily found contentment in the choice she'd made. She taught through her late 20s and into her 30s, becoming a fixture of Red Hollow's community in ways that transcended her formal role. When families struggled, they came to her for advice. When children showed particular aptitude or need, she advocated for them with fierce determination. When the school board tried to cut funding for books and supplies, she argued them down with facts and passion until they relented. She remained unmarried, living at the ranch with Clara and Elias even after most women her age had husbands and children of their own. The gossip about this faded eventually, replaced by acceptance that Miss Turner was simply different, dedicated to her students in ways that left no room for traditional domestic life. Some people pitied her for it. Others admired her independence. Lily cared about neither opinion, secure in the life she'd built. Clara's health began to falter when Lily was 32, a slow decline that started with fatigue and progressed to more serious symptoms the doctor in Red Hollow couldn't fully explain. They made the journey to Denver for specialists who diagnosed a heart condition, treatable to some extent, but ultimately progressive. Clara had perhaps 5 years, they said. Maybe more with care and rest, but probably not many more. The news settled over the ranch like frost, changing everything while appearing to change nothing. Clara continued her routines as much as she could, though Lily took over more of the household work, and Elias hired help for the heavier ranch chores. They didn't speak much about the diagnosis. Clara wasn't one for dwelling on what couldn't be changed. But the knowledge of limited time made every ordinary moment precious. Lily found herself memorizing things she'd always taken for granted. The way Clara hummed while kneading bread, the exact shade of her hair in lamplight, the sound of her laugh when Elias told his terrible jokes. The fear of losing her was physical and constant, a weight in Lily's chest that never fully lifted. "I'm scared," she admitted one evening while they sat on the porch, watching stars emerge. "Of me dying?" Clara's voice was matter-of-fact. "Yes. I'm scared too sometimes. Mostly I'm sad about what I'll miss. Watching you continue teaching, seeing what becomes of your students, growing old with Elias." Clara reached over and took Lily's hand. "But I'm not afraid of death itself, honey. I've had a good life. Better than I ever expected, really. We couldn't have children of our own, but then you walked into our lives and became ours anyway. That was a gift I never imagined I'd receive." "You saved me," Lily said, her voice thick. "We saved each other. You gave us purpose and love and the chance to be parents when we thought that door was closed forever." "That's not nothing, Lily. That's everything." They sat in comfortable silence after that, hands linked, watching the valley settle into darkness. Lily thought about all the years that had brought them to this moment, from a desperate child on a desert road to a grown woman holding the hand of her dying mother, afraid of loss but grateful beyond measure for what had been given. Clara lived 3 more years, long enough to see Lily turn 35 and celebrate 20 years of teaching. Long enough to attend the dedication of the new school library that bore Lily's name, donated by grateful families whose children she'd taught. Long enough to meet James again when he visited from Denver, now a young man of 14 who treated her with gentle respect. She died on a spring morning, Elias holding one hand and Lily the other, in the bed where she'd slept for 40 years. Her last words were, "I love you both," and then she was gone, the fierce spirit that had animated her body simply departing, leaving behind the shell of the woman who had chosen to stop her husband's wagon for a child in need. The grief was enormous, crushing, a weight that made breathing difficult for weeks. Lily taught through it because her students needed her, and because Clara would have expected nothing less, but every day felt like walking through deep water, every small task requiring effort that shouldn't have been necessary. Elias grieved quietly, working himself to exhaustion on the ranch and saying little, but Lily would sometimes find him standing in places Clara had loved, the garden, the kitchen, the porch at sunset, with tears tracking silently down his weathered face. They buried Clara in the Red Hollow Cemetery under a simple stone that read, "Clara Turner, beloved wife and mother, she chose love." The entire town attended the funeral, testament to how many lives she'd touched through her quiet kindness and open home. Afterward, Lily and Elias returned to the ranch and tried to figure out how to live in the spaces Clara had filled. It was harder than either of them expected, not just the practical matters of running a household and ranch, but the emotional landscape suddenly rendered unfamiliar by her absence. "I don't know how to do this without her," Elias admitted one evening, his voice broken in ways Lily had never heard. "Neither do I," Lily said, "but we'll figure it out together, the way she taught us." And slowly, painfully, they did. They learned new rhythms, new divisions of labor, new ways of being family when 1/3 of it had been lost. The grief remained, would always remain, but it gradually became something they could carry rather than something that carried them. Through it all, Lily continued teaching because that was what Clara would have wanted. Continued choosing compassion and seeing potential in struggling children because that was the legacy she'd been given. Continued believing that being abandoned once didn't define you, but being chosen did, and that the choice to love and invest in others was the most powerful force in the world. She had been chosen, and now she spent her life choosing others in return, passing forward the gift that had saved her life and shaped her into who she was meant to become. The 2 years following Clara's death reshaped the landscape of Lily's life in ways both subtle and profound. She and Elias developed a new rhythm in the house that felt less like replacement and more like adaptation. 2 people who had both loved the same woman learning to honor her memory by continuing the work she'd valued. Elias grew quieter, more contemplative, his grief settling into the lines of his face like water carving stone. Lily took over the household management entirely while still teaching, rising before dawn to prepare meals and tend the garden before walking to the schoolhouse. The ranch itself began to feel too large for just the two of them. Elias hired more help. A young man named Thomas, who'd recently lost his own father and needed both work and mentorship, and occasionally day laborers during busy seasons. But the house echoed with absence in ways that made both Lily and Elias restless, searching for purpose in the empty spaces Clara had once filled. It was Thomas who inadvertently provided the catalyst for change. He appeared one morning leading a scrawny girl of about 7, her dress torn and her face streaked with tears. "Found her sleeping in the barn," Thomas said, his young face creased with concern. "Says she ran away from the Miller place. You know them?" Lily knew them. The Millers ran a hardscrabble farm 5 miles east, a family known more for their cruelty than their crops. They took in orphans from the territorial system, supposedly to care for them, but everyone in Red Hollow whispered about how those children were worked like animals and fed like afterthoughts. The girl, her name was Ruth, she said in a voice barely above a whisper, had arms covered in bruises and eyes that held the particular wariness of a child accustomed to violence. Lily recognized that look because she'd once seen it in her own mirror, back when her father's grief had turned corrosive. "Come inside," Lily said gently, reaching out a hand that Ruth stared at for a long moment before accepting. "Let's get you cleaned up and fed, and then we'll figure out what comes next." Over breakfast, eggs and biscuits with honey that Ruth ate with the desperate efficiency of someone who never knew when the next meal might come, the story emerged in fits and starts. The Millers had 6 orphans currently, all between ages 6 and 12. All worked from dawn to dusk with minimal food and frequent beatings. Ruth had run when Mr. Miller had struck her with a belt buckle for spilling milk, the wound on her shoulder still angry and seeping. Lily felt rage build in her chest, the kind of cold fury that came from recognizing injustice she had the power to address. She cleaned Ruth's wound with careful hands while Elias stood in the doorway, his weathered face set in hard lines. "The other children," Lily said quietly, "are they all being treated this way?" Ruth nodded, her eyes filling with fresh tears. "Tommy's only 6. He cries at night because he's so hungry, and Mrs. Miller hits him for keeping her awake." Elias and Lily exchanged a long look across Ruth's bowed head, an entire conversation passing between them without words. Then Elias reached for his hat. "I'm going into town to talk to the sheriff," he said. "This stops today." What followed was a week of intense activity and conflict that shook Red Hollow to its foundations. The sheriff, initially reluctant to interfere with the Millers, they were paying customers of the territorial orphan system after all, changed his mind when Lily brought Ruth to his office and made her show him the belt buckle wound, the finger-shaped bruises on her arms, the burn mark on her hand from being forced to touch a hot stove as punishment. "This is what you're allowing," Lily said, her voice steady despite the anger coursing through her veins. "Children being tortured under the guise of Christian charity. If you don't remove those children from the Miller place today, I'm writing to every newspaper in the territory about the sheriff who let orphans be beaten and starved while he looked the other way." The sheriff, a decent man trapped by bureaucracy and the path of least resistance, finally acted. By evening, all 6 children had been removed from the Miller farm and were temporarily housed with various families in town while the territorial authorities decided what to do next. The Millers protested loudly about their rights and the money they were owed, but their complaints died when 3 of the children testified to the territorial agent about the systematic abuse they'd endured. The question then became where the children would go. The territorial system was overwhelmed, underfunded, and struggling to place orphans across Wyoming and Colorado. The nearest proper orphanage was in Denver, already full beyond capacity. Foster families were scarce. Most people in Red Hollow could barely feed their own children, let alone take in someone else's. Lily sat at the kitchen table that night with Elias, the house quiet around them, except for Ruth's soft breathing from the spare room where she'd been sleeping since her rescue. The girl had attached herself to Lily with fierce determination, following her everywhere and flinching at sudden movements, clearly terrified of being sent back. "We have room," Lily said quietly, giving voice to the thought that had been growing since she'd first seen Ruth in the barn. "The house is too big for just us. Clara's sewing room, the storage room, even the old bunkhouse could be fixed up. We could take them." "All 6? Elias's eyebrows rose, but his voice held consideration rather than dismissal. "Why not? We have the space, the resources, the knowledge. You and Clara fostered children before I came along. We know how to do this. You have your teaching. That's a full-time job already. I'll manage. Other families do it. Balance work and children. And these children need more than just food and shelter. They need what Clara gave me. They need to be chosen. Elias was quiet for a long time, his calloused hands wrapped around his coffee cup. Finally he said, Clara would want this. She always wanted the house full of children's voices. This would honor her memory. So we do it? We do it. The territorial agent was skeptical when they made their proposal, citing Lily's unmarried status and Elias's age. He was 68 now, still strong, but undeniably aging. But Lily's reputation as a teacher carried weight, and Elias's standing in the community as a man of solid character helped. More importantly, there simply weren't other options. The agent agreed to a trial period, 6 months to see if the arrangement could work. The children arrived on a September afternoon, standing in a nervous cluster in the ranch yard. Besides Ruth, there was Tommy, the 6-year-old who cried at night, and his sister May, age 9, who'd been protecting him as best she could. There were twins, Jacob and Joseph, age 11, who finished each other's sentences and moved in perfect synchronization. And there was the oldest, a girl named Sarah, who was 12, and carried herself with a defensive hardness that Lily recognized all too well. "Welcome home," Lily told them, and watched Sarah's expression flicker with something that might have been hope before her protective walls slammed back into place. The first months were chaos. 6 children who'd been starved for affection and consistency didn't know how to accept either. They hoarded food in their rooms despite Lily's assurances that meals would come regularly. They fought with each other over trivial matters, old survival instincts making them competitive and territorial. Tommy wet the bed nightly, and May had nightmares that woke the whole house. The twins broke things, sometimes accidentally, sometimes to test whether destruction would finally trigger the punishment they were expecting. Sarah was the hardest. She challenged every rule, questioned every kindness, and maintained an emotional distance that reminded Lily painfully of her own early days with Elias and Clara. The girl had been with the Millers longest, 3 years of systematic cruelty, and she trusted nothing and no one. "Why are you doing this?" Sarah demanded one evening when Lily tried to help her with homework. "What do you want from us?" "I want you to be safe and happy and educated," Lily said honestly. "That's all. Nobody does something for nothing. There's always a price. The price is being part of this family, doing your chores, working hard in school, treating each other with respect. That's it." Sarah's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "And when we mess up? When we're bad? Then we talk about it, figure out how to do better, and move forward. Nobody hits in this house, Sarah. Nobody withholds food or locks children in closets or any of the other things you endured. Those things were wrong, and they're over." It took months for Sarah to begin believing this, and even longer for the other children to fully relax into the safety being offered. But gradually, incrementally, they healed. Meals became less frantic as they learned food would always be available. Bedtime routines established themselves, complete with story time that all 6 children claimed to be too old for, but never missed. The hoarding stopped. The fighting decreased. Tommy's bedwetting tapered off. May's nightmares became less frequent. Lily watched them transform the way she'd once transformed, and understood with new depth what Clara and Elias had given her all those years ago. It wasn't just material security, though that mattered. It was the daily demonstration that they were wanted, that their presence brought joy rather than burden, that family could be built on choice rather than blood. She balanced teaching with parenting through sheer determination and careful organization. Her students at school understood that Miss Turner now had children at home, and they adapted with the easy flexibility of the young. Sometimes she brought 1 or 2 of the ranch children to school when they were sick and couldn't be left alone, and her students treated them like mascots, reading to them and helping with simple tasks. Elias thrived in his role as grandfather figure, teaching the boys ranch work and showing the girls how to care for the livestock with patience he'd honed over decades. He was gentler than he'd been when Lily first knew him, grief and age having softened his edges, and the children responded to his quiet strength with growing trust. The 6-month trial period came and went, and the territorial agent renewed their arrangement without hesitation. The children were clearly thriving, better fed, better educated, and most importantly, better loved than they'd been anywhere else. The arrangement was formalized, with Lily and Elias becoming official foster parents with a small monthly stipend from the territorial government to help with expenses. 2 years into this new life, when Lily was 37 and the children had settled into their roles as Turners in everything but legal name, her father arrived unannounced on a summer afternoon. He was 62 now, his hair completely gray and his movements slower, but still sober and still married. He'd written to tell her about Sarah's death 6 months earlier, a sudden illness that had taken her in less than a week, and Lily had written back with condolences, but they hadn't seen each other in over a year. He stood in the yard looking at the house full of children's noise and activity. Laundry flapping on lines, May and Ruth playing with a kitten, the twins working with Elias to repair a fence section, and his eyes filled with tears. "You built what I destroyed," he said quietly when Lily came out to greet him. "A home full of children who need you, a family you chose. It's beautiful, Lily. It's everything I failed to give you." "It's what Clara taught me was possible," Lily said. "She showed me that being chosen matters more than being born into something. I'm just passing that forward." They walked down to the creek where Lily had once played as a child, the water running low in late summer but still clear and cold. Her father picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the surface, 3 bounces before it sank. "James enlisted," he said abruptly. "Army, shipping out to Arizona Territory next month to fight the Apache." Lily felt her chest tighten. James was 19 now, old enough to make his own choices, but still so young in her eyes. "How do you feel about that?" "Terrified, proud, helpless." He selected another stone but didn't throw it, just turned it over in his weathered hands. "He's a good man, Lily, better than I was at his age. Sarah and we did right by him. But knowing he's going into danger," he shook his head, "makes me understand some of what you must have felt when I left you on that road. The fear of losing someone you love." "That's not the same thing at all," Lily said sharply. "You chose to abandon me. James is choosing his own path. There's no comparison." "You're right. I'm sorry. He was quiet for a long moment. "I wanted you to know that if something happens to him, if I lose another child, I won't fall apart this time. Sarah's death nearly broke me, but I stayed sober. Grieved without destroying myself or the people around me. I learned that much at least." Lily looked at this man who had been her first family and her first heartbreak, who had left her to die and then spent the rest of his life trying to prove he could be better. He would never be her father in the way Elias was, would never occupy the space Clara had filled. But he was trying, had been trying for nearly 30 years now, and there was something to be said for persistence in the face of irredeemable mistakes. "I'm glad you stayed sober," she said. "Clara would be glad too. She always hoped you'd make it." She was a good woman. They both were. Are. Elias is still good. He finally threw the stone, watching it skip 4 times before sinking. "Thank you for letting me be part of your life, even in this small way. I know I don't deserve it." "Probably not," Lily agreed, "but I'm not keeping you around because you deserve it. I'm doing it because forgiveness is lighter to carry than anger, and because everyone deserves the chance to prove they can change." He left the next morning after breakfast with all 6 children and Elias, the big meal chaotic and loud with everyone talking at once. The children had been wary of this stranger at first, but when Lily explained that he was her birth father, the one who had made mistakes but kept trying to do better, Sarah had understood immediately. "Like us," she'd said quietly. "We made mistakes with the hoarding and the fighting, but you gave us chances to do better." "Exactly like that," Lily had confirmed, moved by the insight. As her father's wagon disappeared down the road, Sarah came to stand beside Lily on the porch. At 14 now, she was growing tall and showing signs of the woman she would become, strong and thoughtful, with Clara's practicality and Lily's determination. "Do you think you'll ever fully forgive him?" Sarah asked. "For leaving you?" Lily considered the question carefully. "I think I already have, mostly. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't hurt. It's about deciding that the hurt doesn't get to control your life anymore. He made terrible choices when he was broken, but he spent decades trying to make amends. That matters. Mrs. Miller never tried to make amends, Sarah said, her voice hard. She just kept hurting us and calling it discipline. Some people never learn, but that's their failure, not yours. You get to choose what you carry forward from that experience. I want to be like you, Sarah said suddenly, fiercely. I want to teach someday, help children who are struggling. Pass forward what you've given us. Lily pulled her into a hug. This girl who had been so defensive and angry 2 years ago and was now talking about a future built on compassion. Then that's what you'll do. We'll make sure you get the education you need. The years continued their steady march, and the children grew as children do. Too fast, their childhoods compressed by the weight they'd carried before finding safety. May developed a talent for music and began teaching piano to younger children in town. Ruth discovered a love of reading that rivaled Lily's own and spent every spare moment with her nose in a book. Tommy, no longer the frightened 6-year-old who cried at night, became Elias's shadow on the ranch, learning everything the old man could teach him about horses and cattle and reading the land. The twins remained inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and developing a reputation as the hardest workers in Red Hollow. And Sarah, true to her word, threw herself into her studies with fierce determination, preparing for the day she could attend normal school and become a teacher. Lily turned 40, watching her household thrive, feeling the satisfaction of purpose fulfilled. She taught hundreds of children over her 25 years in the classroom, but these 6, her 6, represented something deeper. They were proof that being abandoned didn't define you, that trauma could be healed, that family could be built on choice and daily commitment rather than blood and obligation. Elias's health began to decline in the spring of that year, nothing dramatic but a slow diminishment of energy and capability. He was 73 now, still sharp mentally but physically wearing down under the weight of age and hard living. He handed more of the ranch work to Thomas and the twins, spending his days in quieter pursuits, reading, whittling, sitting on the porch, and watching the valley change with the seasons. One evening Lily found him there, his weathered hands idle in his lap, his gaze distant. "You thinking about Clara?" she asked, settling into the chair beside him. "Always thinking about Clara," he said. "But right now I'm thinking about the day I found you on that road. How close I came to just driving past, figuring someone else would stop. But you didn't." "No, and stopping that wagon was the best decision I ever made besides marrying Clara. You gave us purpose, Lily. You made us parents when we thought we couldn't be, and now look what you've built, 6 more children getting the same chance you got. Clara would be so proud." "I am too," Lily said quietly. "Proud of you for stopping, proud of Clara for opening your home, proud of everything you taught me about what family can mean." "Promise me something," Elias said, his voice serious. "When I'm gone, you'll keep this going. Keep opening your home to children who need choosing. Don't let the work stop." "I promise," Lily said, her throat tight. "As long as I'm able, there will be room here for children who need it." Elias died peacefully 18 months later in his sleep on a cold November night. They found him in the morning, his face relaxed in a way it hadn't been since Clara's death, as if some tension had finally released. Lily grieved, but also felt grateful that he'd gone easily, without suffering, without the slow deterioration he'd feared. They buried him beside Clara under the cottonwoods he'd loved, and half of Red Hollow attended the funeral. The children, even the twins who rarely showed emotion, cried openly, having lost the only grandfather they'd ever known. Thomas gave a eulogy that made everyone weep, talking about how Elias had taught him that real strength meant gentleness, that real manhood meant showing up consistently and treating people with dignity. In the weeks following Elias's death, Lily had to make hard decisions about the ranch. She couldn't run it alone while teaching and raising 6 children. Thomas offered to take over as manager, with the understanding that he'd buy it eventually when he could afford to. It was a good solution. Thomas had worked the land for years and loved it the way Elias had. The house and immediate surroundings would remain Lily's, but the working ranch would pass to someone who could give it proper attention. Life reorganized itself around this new reality. Lily was 42 now, sole guardian of 6 children ranging from 10 to 16, owner of a house but not the ranch that surrounded it, still teaching full-time while managing a household that never stopped moving. It should have been overwhelming, but instead it felt right, like every piece of her life had been preparation for exactly this moment. Sarah left for normal school when she turned 18, tears streaming down her face as she hugged Lily goodbye. "I'll make you proud," she promised. "You already have," Lily assured her. "Now go learn everything you can and come back ready to change lives the way yours was changed." One by one, the other children grew and launched into their own futures. May became a music teacher in Denver, marrying a kind man who loved her gentleness. Ruth opened a bookshop in Colorado Springs, creating a space where children could discover the same love of reading that had saved her. Tommy took over as Thomas's partner on the ranch, the land passing to someone who'd been chosen into the Turner family even if he didn't carry the name. The twins joined the railroad, working as a team the way they did everything, sending money home to Lily with letters full of stories about the changing West. And Sarah, true to her promise, became a teacher in a mining town where children desperately needed someone who understood hardship, someone who could see past dirt and poverty to potential underneath. Lily taught until she was 65, finally retiring when her knees complained too loudly about the walk to school and her eyes struggled with the fine print in books. She taught for 40 years total, shaping the lives of thousands of children across multiple generations. Former students came back to visit with their own children, thanking her for believing in them when no one else had. The house never stayed empty. Even after the original 6 children had grown and gone, Lily continued taking in foster children, sometimes 1, sometimes 3, occasionally a whole sibling group that needed to stay together. She gave them the same thing Clara had given her: safety, structure, and the revolutionary knowledge that they were wanted. She was 73 when she received word that her father had died in Denver, peacefully in his sleep at 86. James came to Red Hollow for a brief visit to tell her in person, this half-brother she barely knew, who had nonetheless stayed in contact over the years. He was 51 now, a retired Army officer with gray in his beard and medals from campaigns she didn't fully understand. "He talked about you often at the end," James said as they sat on the porch, where so many conversations had happened over the decades. "How you'd survived what he did to you and built something beautiful from the wreckage. He died knowing he'd failed you, but also knowing you'd forgiven him enough to let him be part of your life. That mattered to him." "He tried to change," Lily said simply. "That's more than many people manage. And he was good to you and Sarah. That counts for something." After James left, Lily sat alone watching the sun set over the valley, thinking about the strange journey that had brought her from that desert road to this porch. She was old now, her body wearing down the way bodies did, but her mind remained sharp and her purpose clear. The house held 3 foster children currently, siblings aged 8, 10, and 13 who'd lost their parents to influenza. They were at that awkward stage where they didn't know whether to trust the safety being offered, but Lily had decades of experience helping children navigate that uncertainty. They'd get there. They always did. Sarah visited frequently, bringing her own children, 2 daughters who called Lily Grandma Turner, and climbed into her lap for stories. May came less often from Denver, but wrote long letters. Ruth sent books constantly, packages arriving with notes tucked inside saying, "Thought you'd enjoy this." The twins were building a railroad spur through Wyoming and promised to visit when it was finished. Tommy ran the ranch with his wife and 4 children, the land flourishing under his careful stewardship. They were all proof of what Lily had learned that first day on the Turner Ranch. Being chosen mattered more than being born into something. Family could be built on daily decisions to show up, to care, to invest in people without expecting return. On a spring morning just after her 75th birthday, Lily stood in her garden, Clara's garden really, though she'd been tending it for 40 years, and watched the sun rise over the mountains. The house behind her was full of children's voices, breakfast cooking, the chaos of morning routines. Her body ached with age and old injuries, but her heart was full. She thought about the little girl she'd been, standing on a desert road with a rag doll, and the terrible knowledge that her father had abandoned her. That girl had been convinced she'd been erased from the world, that being left behind meant she had no value. But that girl had been wrong. Being abandoned once didn't define her worth. Being chosen did. Being chosen by Elias and Clara, who stopped a wagon and offered safety without conditions. Being chosen by children who needed what she could give. Being chosen by students who returned years later with gratitude. Being chosen by a community that trusted her with their children's futures. And most importantly, choosing herself. Choosing to heal rather than harden. Choosing compassion over bitterness. Choosing to build a life that honored the gift she'd been given by passing it forward to others. Annabelle the rag doll sat on a shelf in the living room now, button eyes still watching, stitches still holding after nearly 70 years. Lily's mother had made her with loving hands, never knowing that simple toy would survive everything that came after: abandonment, adoption, loss, grief, joy, and the slow accumulation of chosen family that filled the spaces blood family had left empty. The sun cleared the mountains, bathing the valley in golden light, and Lily smiled. She had been given a second chance on a desert road, and she'd spent her entire life making sure others received the same grace. That was legacy enough for anyone. She turned back toward the house, toward the children waiting for breakfast and the day's work ahead, toward the life she'd built from the ruins of abandonment, toward home. Because that was the final truth she'd learned. You couldn't choose who you were born to, but you could choose who you became. And Lily Turner, teacher, mother, guardian of lost children, had chosen to become someone who made sure no child ever stood alone on a road, convinced they'd been erased from the world. She had been found, and now she spent her life finding others. That was enough. That was everything.